I want to share just a thought here with you. I want to read my first devotional for the new year. I got this wonderful leather-bound devotional book that was given to me by my sister-in-law for Christmas. It's called Experiencing God Day by Day. So I'm going to be using this as a new devotional. And it, of course, goes through, it's for an entire year. So, but here was the very first one, and it was this very first one that kind of set my feet on the path for what I want to share with you today. And I think it's so prudent, pertinent to us, and especially even to me. The scripture comes from John 21:15, and it says, "When they had eaten breakfast, Jesus asked Simon Peter, 'Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?'" And here's the devotional as it went that day. Jesus has a wonderful way of restoring us when we fail. And I know I'm the only one in that category here today, right? None of you have ever failed. He does not humiliate us. He does not criticize us. He does not ask us to make a resolution to try harder. Rather, He takes us aside and asks us to reaffirm our love for Him. Peter had miserably failed the Lord when he fled with the other disciples from the Garden of Gethsemane. And later, he publicly denied that he even knew Jesus. Peter must have wondered if he had been capable of being Jesus' disciple when he was unfaithful to Him in His most crucial hour. Sounding familiar to anyone? I know it touched some nerves with me. As you begin a new year, you may be painfully aware that you have failed the Lord, maybe in many ways. Perhaps you were not faithful. Perhaps you disobeyed His word to you. Perhaps you denied Him by the way you lived. Jesus will take you aside as He did Peter. He will not berate you. He will not humiliate you. He will ask you to examine your love for Him. He asks Peter, "Do you love me?" If your answer, like Peter's, is "Yes, Lord," then Jesus will reaffirm His will for you. If you truly, God bless you, if you truly love Him, you will obey Him. That's what John 14:15 says. So Jesus does not need your resolutions, your recommitments, or your promises to try harder this year. If your resolve to obey God last year didn't help you be faithful, it won't make you any more successful this year. What Jesus asks for is your love. And if you truly love Him, your service for Him in the new year will be of the quality He desires. Do you love me? I'm quoting Jesus here. Scriptures for this is going to come from John 21:15 through 17. Also, John 21:19, John 4:19, John 14:15, and Luke 22:54 through 62. And I began to think about this and how that, Jesus is so understanding and so forgiving. And, I kind of looked back over the years. And matter of fact, Brother Bruce, in his sharing with us yesterday during men's group, had commented, I think possibly maybe it was during your prayer time, Brother Bruce, that, he had mentioned how he began to think back over the years, and, the different times that he'd been reckless and maybe didn't think things through quite right. And then other times when, he knows God was there and God had touched him, and God had helped him, and God had literally saved his life. But then over the years, he's kind of just forgotten about that. Just left that kind of slide into, but then all of a sudden, God brings you to a point. He said God had spoken to him. I hope it's okay, Bruce, that I'm sharing this. But God had brought him to a point, maybe one night, I don't know if it was during his prayer time or, while he was asleep or what was going on there, but, God had began to remind him of all the times, that he had blessed him and that he had been there. Even when possibly Bruce wasn't being the most faithful, God was reminding him, I was there. I was there for you. And this is what he was doing here. We read this story and we all understand. And I know sometimes it's easy for us sometimes to read scriptures and read the accounts of the early church. Read the accounts of some of what the apostles went through and what Jesus went through. And we get to puffing ourselves up, because I would never do that. I would never act that way. I got to tell you, I've gotten past that because God has shown me and I've come to learn, yeah, I would. I have maybe even done worse. But we see them, and what we have to come to understand, is they were human, And I know we think, man, if I'd have been there, if I'd have been in the same room, sitting across the table with Jesus Christ, the Son of the living God, having breakfast with Him, literally having breakfast with Jesus, the Son of God, said, man, how my life would have been different. Really? You think? Because we see people here that experienced it, and yet their humanness was a powerful thing. Even like ours is a powerful thing. Bonnie shared with you sometimes, and I'll be the first one to admit to you, I get tired. I just get flat tired of some of what I have to go through. But now, God hasn't brought me to a point yet where I feel the Holy Spirit speaking to me and that I just need to, take a stand and say, nope, I'm done. Enough is enough. I quit. I haven't felt God speaking that into my spirit yet. He keeps egging me on and encouraging me to go forward and just, keep fighting the good fight and keep doing what you're doing. And then I begin to look back and I think to myself, with all that I've been through and everything that, God has brought me through and what we've been experiencing over the last, 7 years, I guess. This will be year number 7, But in all that 7 years, I can honestly look back and see, where God's hand has been upon me, and at no point has this ever interfered with my ability to answer the call of God on my life. Now, I don't know how you feel about that. Say, well, Pastor, we wouldn't mind if you took a few weeks off. It's okay with us. That was a joke. So I'm not sure how that affects you, but when I look at that, I'm thinking, my God, how powerful you are, that you can keep me. And I've experienced those times and just gone through all of that, but the bottom line here is I don't want to paint a picture of myself being this, I've had my days. I've honestly had my days, Darlene. Bonnie will tell you. Just want to curl up in a ball, and maybe even did curl up in a little ball on the bed. Just have myself a good cry and want to hide from the world. I know people say, really, Pastor, you did that? You felt that way? Yeah, I did. But you know what? Never once has God scolded me for that. Never once has God said, get out of that bed, get up here and, kind of like us men do with our boys sometimes. Try to help them, tell them to man up. They fall down on the baseball field. Oh, get up, rub a little dirt on it, it'll be okay. It's just a man thing. That's just what we do. But God's never been like that. Never once has God ever, slapped at me and said, get up. Put your big boy pants on, get up. Now, I hear my wife say that occasionally. But that's okay. I know it comes from a place of love. And I could go down an entire bunny trail here, because as I was, studying and preparing, there were so many things that came to my mind, and I began to think some of parenting, and some of the way, we see parenting kind of going. And I'm not here to throw stones. I'm not here to criticize, because it's a different world today than what it was when I raised my children. But I do believe I see a trend, and it's not just in the parenting and the kids, but it's in the world overall. What I see happening is, I see in relationships, people get more consumed about the gifts than they do about the giver. You understand what I mean? And I think sometimes there are parents that have kind of fallen into that little bit of a trap. They think that they're building a relationship like nobody else with their children. Why? Because they give their children everything they want. They buy them all of these gifts, and they give them, and they think, oh, my kids are so in love with me. Are they? Are they in love with what you give them? And they're in love with the fact that Mom lets me do anything. Mom gives me anything I want. And sometimes it's so hard to be able to tell the difference. I'm from that day and age, and I know probably some of you are. I've felt the sting of my dad's hand in more places than one. Does that mean my dad didn't love me or doesn't love me? Nope. Did my dad give me everything I ever asked for, everything I ever wanted? Nope. See, I know my dad loved me. Matter of fact, I know he did, because I understand now, didn't understand it then, but I understand now, and was able to understand it raising my children. I love my kids enough on occasion to tell them no. I think a lot of people out there today they've lost that. And I'm not, like I said, I'm not just casting stones. I'm not criticizing today's parents. I don't mean that. You know what I'm saying? But I will give you this little piece of advice if you're raising children or you're raising grandchildren. You understand? You are not breaking any rules when you love them enough to say no. It's okay to do that. Because what we have to understand is it's more important that they fall in love with the giver, when they fall in love with the person rather than the gifts or rather than whatever. And this is exactly what Jesus was teaching Peter in this interaction. Because let's face it, Peter blew it. He blew it. And Claire, he blew it more than once. And even in this particular situation, if you want to look at it accordingly, Jesus had told them where to go and what to do. But where were they? Fishing. Now, that's not a remark against fishing. Please don't misinterpret that. But do you understand what I'm saying? Even where God found them and what He found them doing was disobedient. Because He told them where to go and to wait. Tarry there. Wait there. But they didn't. If you read, in the Scriptures there, you'll find out where Peter, he was kind of the leader of the pack. God had raised him up to that point, because God wanted to use him, so he was. And you'll find in the Scriptures, you'll see, they quote Peter. He says, well, I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm going fishing. And they thought to themselves, well, if you're going, we'll go too. And that's where Jesus found them. But instead of, that face-to-face conversation I could, picture myself having with one of my boys, wasn't the conversation Jesus had with Peter at all. I can imagine, in the human side of it, I would have imagined Jesus would have wanted to call Peter off and say, by the way, in case you haven't realized, told you so. Didn't he? He told Peter, you can say anything you want to say, but I already know, son, what you're going to do. Anybody know any of your kids like that? I can honestly say I knew my kids that way. And some of them, of course, I didn't know quite as well as I thought I did. I guess I didn't know myself because I've shared that story with you. When Tatiana was preparing to go to her senior party, of course, it wasn't that I didn't have any trust in that girl. I knew she had a good head on her shoulders. I didn't distrust her in any way. But I really was worried about her being in an environment somewhere where she stood to, and that's what I told her. I said, Tati, it's not that I don't trust you. Don't feel like you've got a good on your head on your shoulders and can make your own decisions. I trust you in all of that. But you do realize if you go to that party and there are things going on there that shouldn't be going on and something happens, guess what? You're there. You're in trouble. You're guilty by association. So you can't control what everybody else does. And if you're there, you're part of it. And you will pay the penalty for others' crimes or sins. And I felt so proud of myself because that was the end of our conversation. And I found out later, when they were somewhere doing something, whatever, it was a few days later, and I looked and I said to Toddy, or said to Bonnie, I said, I thought Toddy was going to that party. No, she changed her mind. Her and some of her friends are going to do something else. Man, I felt like Dad of the Year. So I tried it on my son. 2 years later, he went. Thankfully, he didn't stay long. He got there and realized, I guess, that Dad was right. They were there about an hour or so, and then they showed up and at the house. What are you doing? I thought you went to that party. Yeah, it was, whatever. So we just left. Is it all right if we just stay here the rest of the night? You can imagine what my answer was to that. But the whole thing about it is what we have to do, even as parents and even as a spouse. And Bonnie and I, we've been together over 43 years. Over 43 years I've been married to the same woman. And you know what, OJ? She still needs to be reminded by me that I love her. She needs to be reminded. Well, jumping Jiminy, how many times do you have to tell her? That ain't what I mean. Sometimes she needs to be reminded by the way I act, by the things I do, or the things I don't do. She needs to be reminded of that. And not only does she need to be reminded of that, I, even more so, sometimes need to be reminded, Nancy. I still need to sit myself down and remind myself why I married her. Because sometimes I'll admit, if I'm not careful, I take her for granted. I just, take for granted that she's going to be there. When I fall down and skin my knee, she's going to be there to put a Band-Aid on it for me. Oh, don't sit there like you guys are all macho. Your wife does the same thing for you. But you understand what I'm saying? I need to remind myself how much I actually love that woman. And what it does is it helps to keep me and helps me to keep myself in check. You understand what I'm saying? Am I making any sense? You getting some of this? And this is exactly why Jesus does what he does. And that's why when Peter had failed so miserably, Peter had screwed it up, and Jesus called him aside and he said, Peter, son, do you love me? And what he wanted Peter to do was just stop and realize. And you have to understand, every time he asked him, Peter answered him, and Jesus replied to him that he loved him back. He said, well, if you do, I love you too. Feed my sheep. Do what I've called you to do. Be the person I've called you to be. Do you love me? Yes, Lord, you know I love you. Then be the person I've called you to be. And that's what God is doing for us. I know I'm not in a club by myself. I made some mistakes. I miss Pam, I miss getting her hot dog. I will never live that down. There's a story there. We'll tell it to you someday. But I make mistakes. And even standing here now on the precipice of 2024, I look back at 2023, OJ, and I can see sometimes when I thought, you know what? I think I could have done that better. I didn't get that quite right. And the thing about it is, what's not going to help me is to make some resolutions and resolve and say, you know what? Okay, I didn't do it last year, but this year I'm gonna. What makes you think you're going to be any better at it this year? Well, you're still the same person you was last year. I don't know about you, but I ain't a whole lot smarter. A little better looking, maybe. But what it's going to take is for me just to be reminded how much I love Jesus. How much He really means to me. And when I think about, the family that I need to talk to and the people that I need to witness to and all of the people out there that need something from me when it comes to Jesus. You understand? There's people that are lost today that are depending on me. Depending on me for what? To tell them about Jesus. I don't want to drop the ball on that. So what motivates me to remember, what motivates me to do what God has called me to do, I can tell you. I need to remember how much I love Him. It's easy for me to remember how much Jesus loves me. Come on, let's face it. But what is it that motivates us? What causes us to do the things that God has called us to do? What causes us to obey Him and do what He's, put into our hearts to do? I can tell you what it is. It's not how much He loves you. It's how much you love Him. And that's why He takes time to remind Peter. He was telling him, buddy, I got a lot of work for you to do. I got some people out there. I got some people that need you to be the person I have called you to be. I get it. You're human. You screwed up. You failed. It's okay. But you need to be motivated into being the person that I've called you to be. Okay? And the only way I know how to motivate you to do that is to remind you, do you love me? Is there anybody in the house today willing to make that comment and say, Lord, you know I love you? And then tell you what He's going to say to you when you do. Then be the person I've called you to be. It's one of the reasons why, we remind ourselves, and we're going to get ready, Bonnie. If you'll get some stuff together there, we'll get ready. We remind ourselves, because I know some people think, the whole thing with communion and all of that we do all the time, and see that's just religiosity. It's just something you go through. It's just hoops that you jump through. It can be. It can be if you let it. But it also can be something beautiful. It can also be something that reminds you you're in a relationship with somebody who loves you more than anything else in the world. And what we do by taking communion, by receiving the bread and receiving the cup, what we're doing is reminding ourselves how much we love Him. See, Lord, I remember, and it reminds me how much we are in love. Started with him, right? It started with him, but then it came down to us, and he's caused us now to fall in love with him. And as long as we remind ourselves every day through this prayer and fast time, and every day throughout this year, I want us to be reminded, and I'm okay, and I'll even give my wife permission to do this, because I get a little short with her sometimes. We've had this conversation because on occasion, we'll be discussing something, and she's made the comment to me over the years. She'll say, "Don't you love me?" And at times that has made me mad. It's like, seriously? 44 years of marriage, and you're going to stand there and look at me and say, "Don't you love me?" But I'm going to give you permission, babe. Anytime you want this year, at any point, I give you permission to get my attention, look and say, "Do you love me?" Because I need to be reminded. Not that I've fallen out of love with you.
Not that I need permission.
Well. Babe, sometimes you're there and you can really help me preach a sermon. And then there's now. But do you understand what I'm saying? It's not because, Claire, it's not because I've fallen out of love with her. And that was the part of it. That was the part of it, I guess, that used to upset me. I mean, you really think I'm going to fall out of love with you? What is wrong with you, woman? But that wasn't it at all. You understand what I'm saying? There's no chance in my world. There's no chance, Darlene, I will ever fall out of love with this woman. Never. But I will admit, there may be days that I need reminded how much I really do love her. You understand what I'm saying? And that's all God wants from us. God isn't going to pick you apart. God isn't going to remind you of all the times you failed and scold you for it. All he wants to do is remind you by asking you one simple question. Do you love me? And actually, it could be worded differently. It could be worded this way. How much do you love me? How much do you love me? And if we can continually remind ourselves how much in love with Jesus we are, I might be out of a job. You get that? If people could actually live their life being in love with Jesus and knowing how much they love Jesus, you wouldn't need somebody standing over you, because you'd be living a life, because that's what the Word declares. When you're in love, you do what you're supposed to do.